Hey guys, it's Jessica.
And this is Kendra, and you're listening to
Lucid Lab. I'm kind of frazzled at the moment because I woke up so late. I didn't have my daughter this morning, and so I'm like, I'm going to sleep in a little bit, but I put on my alarms.
Yep.
I missed every single one of them, and I was in La La Dream World for I don't know how long, because I remember waking up and it said like 6:30, and I'm like, oh, it's not time.
a couple more hours.
Then the next thing I know, I'm like, I should look at the time. This feels like it's been longer than 45 minutes or whatever. And I look at the time and it's like 9:35, and I'm like, fuck.
And I'm already on my way.
In a second. So yeah, I'm like, can I have 30 more minutes to take a shower? And she's like, no. I was like,
but yeah, you can. I was responding while driving, which, you just talk to it. And then when I pulled over, I was like, take all the time you need, but you didn't see it. So.
Oh, I didn't see that. No, I didn't. Because showers take a while with girls with long, full hair. So.
I understand.
I think it's just that my body needed it.
Yeah, always.
Obviously, because I can wake up every day with my alarms to get my kid to school, but it's like my body knew, no, it's Saturday right now, and you have no child to take to school, so you shall ignore every alarm.
Yeah. Well, I am pretty impressed that you pulled it off as quickly as you did. And here we are. So we're not that far behind. I got up early because my cat has been sick and I wanted to make sure he was okay. So yesterday I was volunteering up in the mountains, which I do every year. We were planting flowers. And when you're up there, there's no service, which I love because we were talking about it beforehand. You're just in it with nature. Yep. I'm planting flowers. I'm touching the earth. I'm doing all the good things you're supposed to do more of. But as soon as I get out of the mountains and my service comes back, I get like bombarded.
Mom.
Yes, by my kiddo, and my cat was at home just hacking shit up all over the house, and I didn't know what to do, and he kept coughing, and I could hear him on the phone like making this horrible noise, like something kind of like he was trying to cough up a hairball. And I was like, oh my God, now I'm gonna have to take this cat to the vet, and it's after hours. It's gonna cost twice as much, blah, blah, blah. But apparently he got a hold of one of those wand toys that have the feathers on it.
Yeah.
He drug it under the bed and wrapped it around where I couldn't get to it. And then he just proceeded to sit there and eat the feathers. So he's okay. He just gave me a good scare and I was worried about him all night. But kittens are resilient and apparently eat all kinds of shit.
Yeah, I was more worried about plants in your house.
That's me too. Yeah. Because I hadn't been home. Usually I work from home, so I watch him all day. And he had just had free roam of the house while I was gone.
He's like, I will eat feathers out of protest.
I feed the cat. Like, I feed him plenty of good things.
It's not good enough. It's boring.
Well, and then this morning when I went to check on him, because he stays in his own little room because he's grounded from the house, he had eaten half a Kleenex. And I was like, damn it.
Tissue paper. Yep. My cat eats tissue, paper towels, anything that is paper. Can't have anything, especially for him because he can climb and jump.
Oh, he gets everywhere.
My cat doesn't do that. She doesn't jump on things. So that was my it's the
exciting
same
day.
As a baby. You got to put all sharp things away. You got to make sure they don't bonk their heads on sharp corners. And,
it's true.
Yeah.
And I didn't even tell everybody this, but Jessica knows. Just a couple of weeks ago, he climbed up to the top of my second floor balcony and fell off.
Yeah. And it's a far fall.
It was far and I didn't see it happen. So I don't know how he fell. I just heard him like cry out. And I was afraid he like broke something, but he's fine.
Yeah.
They have 9 lives. They say that about cats. I believe it now after this
And they
cat.
take all of their first 8 in the first year.
He's going to turn my hair gray. I forgot having a kitten is like having a baby again.
He's so cute though. And I can't wait for you to bring him over to meet Saphira.
Yes, we're going to have a play date with our cats.
With our black cats.
And hope that they like each other.
Mine's a great grandma though, so we'll see.
He might annoy her. He might be a little too rambunctious.
I don't know. She's really opened up since we've moved.
I love her. She talks so much.
I know.
Maybe they'll just sit there and talk to each other the whole time.
Can you imagine just like getting video of 2 kitties like meow, meow,
having
meow,
a conversation? Have you seen the one of the cats? They sound like they're having an argument back and forth.
I've seen a lot of cat videos, so probably.
Yeah. Yeah, probably like 60% of my TikTok is covered in cat videos.
And bad stuff. Yeah, I'm the same way.
And the depressing. I think that's what it is. It goes between like good and bad. So I'm like, happy. And then you go to like, oh my God, I can't believe this shit is happening in the world we live in. And then you go back to a cute animal video. It's not all cats. I also get all these other animal videos.
It's pure empathy, right? Like our heart is attracted to things that are going to make us feel good, but then also we're stuck feeling for other things that are going on in the world. And so it's the mixture of that. I have the exact same algorithm, I think.
Yeah. And then I also get all the man versus bear.
Yeah, that whole conversation is pretty funny.
And a lot of true crime, because that's what I'm looking for a lot of times when I go on TikTok to research episodes. So
yeah, sometimes we find, ideas from there. Like, wow, I haven't heard of that. And usually it's smaller cases that aren't talked about nationwide or something like that. And those deserve attention too. So I do like coming across some of those. So guess what?
What?
I'm trying to remember when this happened. I think a long time ago, I told you that my daughter lost her watch, which is a cheap version of an Apple Watch, right? But it's a way that I can connect with her, text with her, call her. And it pissed me off because I wasn't even done paying it off and she lost it. I feel like, what was that, like a year ago?
That was a long time ago.
She found it yesterday.
Where?
At school. She dropped her pencil and she hit her head on the corner of a desk. And so she went to the nurse's office for an ice pack. And as she's standing there waiting for them to hand it to her, she sees all these like pieces of jewelry and watches laid out on the counter. And she's like, that's my watch.
Like a lost and found kind of a thing.
Yeah. And I have gone to them 100 times asking for this watch.
Yeah.
And it looks just as it did. So I'm like, where has it been for a year?
Was she in the nurse's office at some point and maybe they took it off? And
no,
she forgot?
She said that she put it in her cubby and then it went missing.
Okay.
So it's very possible that a little kid took it and then the mom finally found it or something. It was like, this is not yours. And like brought it back to the school. But now she's like reconnected. And I'm like, I was happy without that bill, but okay.
Oh, now you have to pay it again? Oh, shit.
Oh, well, I just think it's funny because it was just recently that I was like, things come back to me. And here we are, her watch, which was this big thing for a long time because she keeps asking for things. I'm like, you lost your watch. You proved to me.
Yeah, you prove that you can't take care of something.
Take care of things, and so I'm not going to get you anything. And the watch is like, I'm home.
Yeah, you can buy me more things, Mom.
Like, great.
You're like, no, this was not the point I was trying to get across.
But it's back.
That's awesome.
So what are we doing today?
So I am doing something a little different. I call it kind of a murder mystery, kind of very whodunit, Agatha Christie style.
Oh, like Clue?
Kind of.
Okay.
I think some of our listeners are probably familiar with this story. It is big in the true crime community, kind of like Kinder Kaifek, where people are always trying to figure it out. I came across tons of Reddits, and it is the murder in room 1046.
Okay.
Which kind of sounds like a mystery novel. That's the title.
Well, there's a movie with John Cusack. What is that?
Yeah, I was thinking of that one too. It's not 1046, but it's something along
similar.
Those lines.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a good movie.
It is.
Yeah.
I like John Cusack in pretty much any movie he's in. I'm going to tell this story in a different way than maybe we do other episodes because this is an old-timey case.
I like old-timey.
Yeah. And I know some people don't, but I think it's really, really interesting, even if you're not into like old-timey things, because it's an unsolved mystery and sharing it gives other people ideas and maybe one day it'll get figured out.
Maybe. Oh, and it's room 1408.
1408 is the John Cusack movie.
Yeah.
I wonder if this inspired it.
It may be. I guess I'll have to hear the story.
So deep in the downtown headquarters of the Kansas City Police Department, there's a roll of microfiche that spits out a stack of copy paper a full 5 inches thick. The file is marked Roland T. Owen, and it's dated by hand of January 4th, 1935.
Okay.
This is the case file for the unsolved murder of a man who died in the old General Hospital a day after his battered body was discovered by a bellboy in room 1046 of the President Hotel in downtown Kansas City. The dead man was found to have several aliases, and I won't reveal what was found to be his true name until we get through this crazy story. His brutal murder has long fascinated true crime writers and podcasters, probably because the facts are so bizarre. A victim who used his last breaths to deny being beaten to death, a mysterious man named Don, letters sent to the victim's mother after he died but before she knew of his passing, and a mysterious donor who paid for his burial and sent flowers with a cryptic note.
Ooh.
It's all the makings of a good whodunit story.
This is like Only Murders in the Building. kind of.
The show?
Yeah.
I haven't watched that.
I watched like the first season, but it's giving me that feeling
that
right now.
Vibe.
Anyway.
So I'm going to dive in first by just retelling the facts. It will read like a story, as I already said, and these are all taken directly from the police records of 1935. This is back when the only real evidence detectives had to go off was firsthand accounts from witnesses, not a lot of forensics. There were no cameras, there were no phone records to trace, no credit cards. It was the time when you could get away with many, many things.
With Moira.
Our story is going to start on January 2nd, 1935. I want to set the scene with what Kansas City was like in 1935.
Okay.
So in December of 1933, Prohibition had ended across the United States, but that didn't matter much in Kansas City, or what locals would call KC.
Mm-hmm.
They had simply opted out of the amended Constitution before that, so the city was known as a haven for debauchery and organized crime.
Definitely.
Yes. Kansas City was known as what they called a wide open town, where jazz clubs stayed open until dawn, and you could pretty much get any vice you wanted in the city. It was a party town, which you wouldn't think of that really, like if I think of Kansas City now.
I mean, Kansas City now is a lot like Denver.
It does have a really cool, and we'll talk about it, the Power and Lights District is like their area, and that's where this hotel is located.
Mm-hmm.
So for nearly a decade and a half, between 1925 and 1939, this political boss named Thomas Pendergrass, they also called him Boss Tom, he kind of ran the city, and he wasn't an elected official. He was a behind the scenes shadow kind of guy, but he gave a lot of money to the local Democratic faction at the time, and he ran the Kansas City politics. They basically would just turn their eye the other way when it came to what he was doing in the criminal underworld.
Of course. They go hand in hand.
Yes. And he had influence on everything, including the police department. So I bring that up just because as we go into this case, there is thoughts. One of the theories that we'll go into has to do with organized crime.
Yeah, obviously that he's connected, especially if he has a bunch of different names.
Yes. The police chief that was in charge of Kansas City at the time, his name was Higgins. He was directly linked with the mob, and he actually ended up serving time in prison for tax evasion, because I think that's what everybody in the mob ended up in prison for.
They got to get him for something.
So it was a very corrupt time in Kansas City.
Yeah.
But it was also the kind of place that would draw in young people from all over that wanted to live the life
and do drugs, and yeah.
So that brings us to this Wednesday, January 2nd of 1935. A man traveling alone with no luggage showed up at the Hotel President at 14th and Baltimore in Kansas City, Missouri. He apparently had one of those faces that different people would read as far as age, because when they interviewed, some people said his age was between 20 and 25. Another person at the hotel said he looked about 25 to 30. And yet another one said he looked 35 years old.
Okay.
It was about 1:20 in the afternoon when he showed up at the Hotel President.
With nothing.
A few facts about the Hotel President. It had been built in 1925, and it was a big hub for anyone coming to town that was important. The 1928 Republican National Convention had been there. Presidents had stayed there. They had attracted such entertainers as Frank Sinatra.
Oh, wow.
Benny Goodman. So this was like the place to go and be seen.
If you're in the area.
And it is now on the National Register of Historic Places, so you can still stay here. Oh. It is owned by Hilton now. It's a huge hotel. I'll put pictures on Instagram. So the man showed up at the front desk, and he asked for a very specific room. He wanted an interior room that was several floors up. So when you say an interior room, that just means that the window would face the courtyard garden area instead of the outside street.
Yep.
He signed the register as Roland T. Owen, and he gave Los Angeles as his home address. He paid for 1 day.
Wow. 1 day to come die. Huh.
It was easy for those who were working at the hotel to describe him because he had a few unique features. He had a cauliflower ear, if you know what that is, which is common in people who are like boxers and wrestlers.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. He had dark brown hair, and he had a large horizontal scar on the left side of his scalp right above his ear. It was basically like an area where the hair wouldn't grow because it was such a big scar. Okay. And they said that he had like part of his hair kind of combed over to try and cover it up.
Okay.
The desk clerk gave Mr. Owen the key to room 1046. And back in this time, you wouldn't go to your room by yourself. The bellboy would always go up with you. And so the bellboy was Randolph Probst, and he was to show him to his room. He turned around to pick up luggage and realized that he had no luggage, which was odd, but
he's like,
whatever.
Dang it, I'm not going to get a tip.
Right. He's like, what am I going to carry? Probst would later describe Owen as neatly dressed. He was wearing a black overcoat. He said they chatted on the way up to the 10th floor. Owen told the bellboy that he had been at the Mulebach Hotel the night before. He was complaining that they had charged him the outrageous price of $5 for his room, which is equivalent to about $114 in today's money.
That's not very much, but we're also in a weird place where everything's gone up dramatically over the last 5 years. So
correct. To give perspective, in 1935, the average wage in the U.S. was 54 cents an hour.
Yeah, kind of like this Jack situation. Jack Parsons.
Yes. As the two got off the elevator on the 10th floor, they turned right and headed down the corridor to get to room 1046, which was right next to the stairwell. Owen unlocked the door and entered while the bellboy turned on the light. Owen walked through a short entryway. There was a closet to his right, bathroom to his left, and then the overall room itself. Mm-hmm. It was about a 9-foot by 12-foot room, so very similar to, I guess, any standard hotel room today. Mm-hmm. There was a bed in the middle of the room, and there was a small stand with a telephone. There was also a writing table with a chair, a dresser, and then in the northeast corner of the room, there was an easy chair. The bellboy followed him in and watched as Owen took 3 things out of his pocket. These were what he was traveling with, and that was a comb, a hairbrush, and some toothpaste. Well, that was it.
That's all you need to look good after you take a shower, I guess, for guys.
I guess. He has a tube of toothpaste, but no toothbrush. So I don't know if back in these days they gave you a toothbrush at the
maybe. Or maybe
hotel.
he was just planning on buying one
or he's just using his finger.
Or just using his finger. Yeah.
He placed the 3 items on the sink, and then the 2 men exited the room and headed back out towards the elevator when the bellboy noticed that they forgot to lock the door, because back then you had the actual key and you had to lock it from the outside. And he said, hold on a minute before we go down in the elevator. I'm going to run back and lock your room. And Owen was like, okay.
Don't let anybody steal my toothpaste. It costs $1.
I guess that's maybe why he didn't give a fuck. He's like, whatever, I don't have anything. They then returned to the elevator. Owen took the key back and they went back down to the first floor. The bellboy went back to doing whatever he was doing, and Owen would exit the building.
Okay.
So now enters the next important person in the story, and that is the maid. This
Always.
is like the clue. We've got the bellboy. We've got the maid. We've got Roland T. Owen.
We have a candlestick downstairs.
Maybe. The maid that first day, her name was Mary Soptic, and she had just come back into work after a day off, and she went into room 1046 that afternoon just to clean. She found that the door was locked from the inside, which means someone's probably in the room, and so she knocked, and Roland Owen let her in, which she said it surprised her a little bit because last time she had cleaned that room before she had the day off, there was a woman in there. So she's a little taken aback that the man entered, but she said he was very nice. And she said, oh, I'm sorry. I'll come back later since you're in the room. And he said, no, it's okay. Come on in. And so she came in and he kind of just watched her clean, which I think is weird, but
very weird.
I always leave. When
don't do that. If you have people cleaning your house, don't stand there and watch them.
No.
Do you like being watched while you're working?
No.
And they're bent over and doing hard stuff. Leave them alone. Give them some peace.
Mary did notice that the shades were tightly drawn. It was very dark in the room, and it's the middle of the day. She said the only light on was the lamp on the desk, and it was very dim. From the very beginning, once Roland T. Owen checked into the hotel, all of the staff noticed something was kind of off.
Well, yeah, he looked like he was from like one of those Crank movies or something.
I don't know. But they probably see this all the time if the, organized crime's big in Kansas City.
That's true.
In her signed statement to the police, Mary said that from his actions and the expression on his face, she said that he seemed like he was either worried about something or afraid, and that he always wanted to just be in the dark.
And sleep.
He wasn't sleeping.
Or hide.
He was just kind of hanging out in the room.
Yeah.
She said he watched her while she cleaned the room. Then he just came into the bathroom. He brushed his hair and then he put his coat on. He was going to leave the room and he told her to leave the door unlocked when she left because he was expecting a friend to show up in a few minutes.
Oh.
So Mary took all of the towels out of the room to go have them laundered, because back in these days, they didn't just have infinite number of towels like they do at hotels today. So they would come and take your dirty towels out of the room and then bring them back later.
Okay.
Which she would come back later in the evening to return clean towels.
So it wasn't immediately replenished is what you were saying?
Yeah, they wouldn't come in with a set of clean towels already.
Okay.
They would take yours, wash them, bring them back later. So the maids were in and out of your room a lot more than they would be in today's hotel scene.
Glad that's changed.
I don't want anybody in my room.
Until I leave.
Yeah, I usually put do not disturb.
Anything.
I'm like, I'm good. I can use the same towel 2 nights. I'm good.
Well, now they provide like 10. So.
Yeah. When she came back to deliver the fresh, clean towels, she found the door unlocked. So she opened it and she was surprised to find him in the room.
Okay.
The room was dark again and he was laying across the bed, completely dressed. She thought it was odd. He didn't say anything to her. He was just kind of laying there. So she dropped the towels and got the fuck out because he was weird. She did notice a note on the desk as she was leaving. There was some light coming in from the hallway and she couldn't help herself. She wanted to read it and it said, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes. Wait."
Ooh.
So that's everything on January 2nd that we know.
Okay.
The next morning, Thursday, January 3rd, Mary was back at it and she headed to room 1046 around 10:30 a.m. to clean it. This time, the door was locked from the outside, which typically means that the person has left the hotel.
Okay.
Because you can't lock the door from the outside if you don't have the key.
Right.
So she assumed that the room was empty. She unlocked the door with her passkey and was completely shocked to find Roland T. Owen sitting in the dark.
Oh.
He had been locked in the room from the outside.
Oh.
So he could not get out.
Interesting. There's no way to unlock that lock from the inside?
No, you need the key.
So, okay.
It's just different from back then. It was a real key.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I'm just thinking of my front door. My real key locks the door, but it's inside. It's 2 locks. And the deadbolt would mean nobody would be able to get in with the key from the outside, but I can still unlock both locks.
So this isn't like what we have today where the keys are built into the doorknob. You know how we turn the lock? Mm-hmm. Back in these days, you had an actual key and then the doorknob was just by itself.
Oh, gotcha.
I'm thinking about like all the old houses. My grandma's house was like that.
Yeah.
If somebody turned the key from the outside, anybody inside the room could not get out.
Yeah, actually, I'm thinking back to one of my old houses and it had that. Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's important in this case because that means somebody else has the key. He no longer is in possession of the key to his room because he was only given one. The maid immediately knew something was off. But she said he was just sitting there in the dark. And while she was cleaning, the telephone rang. Roland answered the phone. And after a moment, he said, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry. I just had breakfast."
Okay. Dawn, geez, leave him alone. You locked him in and you're like, "You want some pancakes?"
Right. She said after another moment, he repeated, "No, I'm not hungry." After he hung up the phone, Roland decided to get chatty with the maid and he started asking her about her job.
Oh.
He asked if she had control of the entire floor. He asked if the President was a residential hotel. And then he started repeating the story he did to the bellboy about how he had stayed at the Mulebach Hotel and they had overcharged him.
He can't get over it.
And he was like, the room was the same as this one, but it costs $5. I don't know how much he paid for room 1046.
Well, that's crazy because this presidential May today costs like $400 a night, which is ridiculous.
I should have looked it up. It is the only like hotel in that Power and Lights district now. So I bet it's pretty expensive.
Yep.
And it looks very nice.
Yeah.
So they're just chatting. He's complaining. And then Mary finished cleaning. She got the dirty towels and left to go launder them.
Well, he could have gotten up and left. She unlocked it for him.
Yeah, he
stayed.
So he had a way to get out if he wanted to at this point. She returned at 4 p.m. with the clean towels that she had taken. And at this time, she heard 2 men in the room talking. It kind of sounded like it was a heated discussion. So she just knocks real gently on the door. And she said, her gruff voice said, "Who is it?"
Oh, Dawn's mean.
It sounds like. She said, "It's housekeeping and I'm just here to drop off the clean towels from earlier." And the voice replied, "We don't need any." and she thought that was odd because she knew that they had no towels in the room, but she wasn't gonna like fight with it. She said it sounded very like mean, and so she just left.
Okay.
That afternoon, Jean Owen, a 30-year-old woman who lived in Lee's Summit, which was an hour or so away from Kansas City.
I actually know a lot about Kansas City because I used to run a company there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I have a lot of details popping up in my brain that I don't want to think about right now.
So she drove into Kansas City to do some shopping and meet up with her boyfriend. After a few hours of shopping, she started to feel ill, and she decided that she would just stay in a hotel instead of heading home that night. And she checked into the hotel president. She was given keys to room 1048.
Oh, right next door.
She called her boyfriend and told him that she was staying in town for the night and he should come visit her. He showed up to her hotel room around 8:30 p.m., something like that, and he stayed there until about 10:30 p.m. and then left. In her statement to the police, she said that during the night, she heard a lot of noise, which sounded like it was on the same floor and consisted largely of men and women talking loudly and cursing at each other.
Oh.
She said the noise was enough to wake her up and bother her enough to call the front desk, but then she decided not to.
Oh, she didn't want to be the party pooper.
She didn't want to be part of it. Yeah. Or, yeah, it's awkward sometimes when you're in hotels and you hear, and it sounds like they were arguing and such, and she just didn't want to get involved.
Well, if you think about it, if they do get a noise complaint, it's most likely coming from who's next to you.
Yeah.
And you're vulnerable at a hotel.
Mm-hmm. I've been in that situation. Just when I was visiting Yosemite, we were staying in a hotel, and the guy next to us, I swear to you, was playing his TV.
Oh, I hate
that. So fucking loud. We could hear every word of it.
Yeah.
He was playing it till like 1 a.m. in the morning. Like he probably just fell asleep to it.
Well, you always wonder in those situations if the TV is loud for another reason.
I know.
That's where my brain goes. What are you doing to try and mask the noise of?
I know. Like he was watching a Disney movie at one point.
That's
like,
even fucking creepier.
He kept changing the channels.
Oh my God, that's my dad.
It was so fucking annoying. I had to put earplugs in and finally fell asleep. And then he woke up the next morning and started making really loud, like old man noises. Like
I totally
and burping.
Oh my God. I can't believe you had to hear all that.
And then he's like slams the door leaving. It was just gross. And before he came in and started turning on his TV, he and a coworker were literally standing right outside our door at 10 o'clock at night, just shooting the shit.
Oh my gosh.
I sat there and complained, but I did not call.
Yeah.
Because they would have known it was me.
Yeah.
And
that's a motel for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was a girl there with my kids. Always take your earplugs. Also happening on Thursday, January 3rd, around 11 p.m., a man named Robert Lane was driving on 13th Street. He said that as he was driving, he noticed something rather strange. He saw a man running on the north side of the street. They have all of the streets in here, but I don't think any of that matters because none of us know Kansas City. So
I kind of do.
He's just driving home and he sees a man on the side of the street running.
Mm-hmm.
He said the man was in pants, shoes, and just his undershirt.
Oh, okay.
He thought that was odd. It's January and it's cold out for a guy to be running with just his undershirt on.
Not if you're overheating.
He started waving and shouting to Robert to stop.
Oh.
Robert pulled over and the man approached his stopped car and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were a taxi." Then he looked up and down the street and he said, "Will you take me to where I can get a cab?" Robert nodded, realizing that this guy seemed to be in distress, and said, "You look as if you've been in it bad," and told him to get in the back seat.
This is when all white people were homies back then.
As the man was getting into his car, he heard him grumble, "I'll kill that tomorrow."
Oh, Dawn.
Probably. He said it was indiscernible exactly what he was saying, but it's just a guy grumbling under his breath like, "Fuck him, we'll kill him."
Okay.
Robert looked back at the man in the rearview mirror and he noticed that he had a deep scratch on his left arm. And he also noticed that the man was cupping his hands. He thought the man was trying to catch blood that was probably coming out of the wound, trying to keep it from dripping into his car, which is nice.
Yeah.
You get in a person's car, don't bleed all over it.
He didn't see the blood before?
I guess not.
He's just wearing a wife beater?
He just saw a guy and was like, "Oh, you look like you've been through it."
Yeah, the wall.
The wall. As he was heading towards 12th Street and Troost, the man thanked Robert quickly and just opened the door and jumped out and ran towards a restaurant where there was a parked cab outside, but there was no driver. And so he saw the man get into the driver's side of the cab and start honking the horn.
Oh, wow.
And then the taxi driver came hurrying out and they drove off.
Interesting. This is a movie.
That's what I like. I'm just every time I listen to this story, that's what I picture. So the next accounts we have come from Charles Blotcher. He was the elevator operator, which, yes, that was a job back in these days.
Yep.
You could not just push a button.
Nope.
They were working for tips, and so they would try and remember the names of people that were going to the different floors. And so they have a really good memory, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That's part of their job. So he was working the graveyard shift that night on January 3rd. For the first hour and a half of his shift, he was very busy, but around 1:30 a.m., the business tapered off. There was some kind of boisterous party going on in room 1055, so he's going to the 10th floor quite often.
Okay.
In his statement, sometime in the first 3 hours of his shift, he said he took a woman that he recognized as being a woman who frequents the hotel with different men in different rooms.
Okay.
That was their way of saying
Sex
a sex worker. He said he took her to the 10th floor and she asked where room 1026 was. He told her where to find it. And then about 5 minutes later, he received the signal to return to the 10th floor.
When pick her back up because he was done.
When he got to the 10th floor, the woman was there. She said that no one had answered room 1026. And she seemed confused because the person who had asked her to come there seemed very eager. She asked if he knew maybe there was someone in 1024. Maybe she just got the room number wrong. And so she said, there's a light on in 1024. I'm going to go back and try that room instead. And so he returned back to the first floor. And then 30 or 40 minutes later, he received a signal to go back to the 10th floor. And the same woman was there and she left the building at that time.
So it might have not been the right room, but whoever answered that door was like, sure, why not?
A lot of people will bring this up. Well, we'll keep going on this story, but 1026, 1046, maybe the digit was just off.
Okay.
The woman was described as being dark-haired, about 5'6", slender, and she was wearing a long black overcoat.
Okay.
So she's often referred to as the lady in black.
Me. I did it. I killed him.
It was you in 1935.
I'm a time traveler.
About an hour later, the same woman returned to the hotel.
Okay.
This time she wasn't alone. She had a man with her. The man was described as being about 5'6", also slender, wearing a light brown overcoat. A lot of people will say that they almost look like they could be siblings.
Interesting.
Very similar looking features.
Okay.
The two of them got into the elevator and asked to go to the 9th floor.
Are there any stairs between the floors?
Yes.
Okay.
They were up there for a while, and then the hotel operator received a signal around 4:15 a.m. to go back to the 9th floor, and this time just the woman was there. He took her back down, and she left the hotel.
Leaving her brother.
15 minutes later, he got a signal to go back to the 9th floor. They call him the very creative man in brown.
Yep.
Was there waiting. He complained to the elevator operator that he couldn't sleep and he was just going to leave.
Yep, because that's what you do. You just go out on the town when nothing's open.
It's 4:30 in the morning.
Okay.
So he took him back down and the man in brown left the hotel as well. Both the woman in black and the man in brown were also noted by James Haddon, who was the hotel's night clerk working the front desk.
Okay.
So now we're to Friday morning, January 4th. So he's now been in the hotel for 2 nights.
Okay.
He only paid for one. I don't know if he returned and paid for the other one or somebody did. There's nothing about that.
Don felt bad. He treated him to a night.
He's like, okay. But he locks him in his room, apparently.
He's his pimp. He's his wrestling pimp.
So just after 7 o'clock in the morning on Friday, January 4th, Della Ferguson was working the telephones because back then they had the switchboards. And she noticed that the phone was off the hook in room 1046. She kept an eye on it, and after 10 minutes, she noticed it was still off the hook. She requested that the bellboy run up to the room and tell them, hey, your phone's off the hook. put it back on. The bellboy working was once again Randolph Probst, who had originally taken Roland up to his room that first day. He got to room 1046 and the door was locked from the outside, and there was a don't disturb sign hanging from the doorknob.
Oh.
Probst knocked loudly and got no response. After a moment, he again knocked loudly, and finally he heard a deep voice say, "Come in."
Oh.
He tried the doorknob, but it was locked. Again, he knocked, and this time he heard the voice say, "Come in and turn on the lights." The bellboy did not have a passkey to get in.
Oh, okay.
And he somehow realizes, I don't know how the staff knows if it's locked from the inside or the outside. This is a big part of the story, but he knew it was not locked from the inside. Even if the person was inside, they couldn't let him into the room.
Oh,
because the room was locked from the outside.
Okay.
He just yelled, "Hey, your phone's off the hook, put it back." And then he left. He told Della, who was the one working the switchboard, that he thinks the guy is probably drunk and that she should just see if he puts the phone back on the hook and maybe send somebody up later if it didn't get fixed.
Okay.
About an hour later, we're now at 8 a.m., she noticed that the phone for 1046 was still off the hook. And this time she sent a different bellboy, his name was Harold Pike, up to the room.
Did they give him a key?
She sent him with a passkey this time after Probst had told her it was locked from the outside and he couldn't get in. So Harold got up there. He found that the door was still locked from the outside. After knocking and receiving no response, he used the passkey to let himself in. The room was completely dark, but he did have the light from the hallway where he could see some things. And he said that Roland Owen was lying on the bed naked, surrounded by what appeared to be dark shadows, apparently passed out drunk.
Dark shadows. Blood?
Potentially.
They could have saved him.
He saw that the telephone stand had been knocked over and that the phone was on the floor. Assuming that he had just passed out drunk, Harold straightened the stand, put the phone back on the stand, and hung it back up. He then left the room, locked the door behind him, and returned to the lobby, told his supervisor what he saw, and they just kind of let it go for a little bit.
So he didn't look close and see the blood?
No.
Okay.
I think this is just a time when you didn't mess with people. And I think everyone in the hotel, all the staff was probably already talking about room 1046 being like a weird situation. And they probably just were like, he's just drunk. I'll just hang the phone back up. I can get out of here. So now 2.5 hours later, another phone operator named Betty Cole notices that the phone for 1046 has fallen off the hook again.
Oh, he's trying to get someone's attention.
Maybe
he's trying to get help.
She looked for a bellboy to send back up to the room. This time it was Randolph Probst's turn to go back up. He had a passkey this time because they knew the door was locked from the outside. He went back up to the room and noted that the do not disturb sign was still on the door.
Yeah, because he can't get out of the bed and take it off.
He knocked loudly 3 times and there was no response. So he unlocked the door with the passkey. As he was opening the door, it felt like he was having a hard time opening it.
Oh.
He entered the room, and right there by the door, Roland was on the floor on all fours, holding his head in his hands, and there was blood coming out of his head. Randolph turned the light on, and he looked around and he saw blood everywhere. Blood was on the walls, on the bed, in the bathroom. He quickly placed the telephone receiver back on the hook, as he was told to do, and then he rushed downstairs to get someone to call for help.
Can't you just call from the phone to the lady, say, "Hey, I'm in 1046.
Right.
Call for help."
He said he was frightened immediately. He didn't know what to do. He had never encountered something like this, and he kind of just panicked. So he just rushed back downstairs. And he's also just a young bellboy. I mean, back in this day, he's probably like 14, honestly.
Oh, that's true.
So he went and found his assistant manager and said what he found. They hurried back up to 1046 and realized at this point that Roland had collapsed completely. So 3 detectives showed up along with Dr. Harold Flanders. Back in these days, the way that crime scenes were handled is that the doctor was actually the one that did more of the forensics side of it instead of the detectives. The detectives weren't really trained. They noted that Roland had been tied up with some kind of cord around his neck, his wrists, and his ankles. And it looked like he had been tortured.
Oh, was he like hogtied in like a way when he was on his elbows and knees?
I think maybe that's why. There were knife wounds in his chest right above his heart. One of these knife wounds they would find later had punctured his lung. His skull was fractured on the right side where he had been struck many times. There was bruising around the neck, suggesting that he had been strangled at some point as part of the torture.
Jeez.
They noted all of the blood. It was on the bed, it was on the wall, and even a small amount of it had splattered onto the ceiling above the bed. So they had really been
going at it,
wailing on him.
Yeah.
They took Roland into the bathroom. Surprisingly, he was still conscious at this time.
Wow. Okay.
And as soon as they cut the cords around his wrists and his hands were free, the first thing he did was turn on the bathtub.
Oh.
Which seems odd.
Yeah.
The doctor just shut it back off, and then they started asking him questions. I think he turned on the bathtub. Maybe his room was bugged.
Oh.
And he was trying to, because that's something you do if you know people are listening. That's my thought when I first saw this, because police were in the room. He knew they were going to start asking questions, and he turned that on to try and block out the noise. So they asked him who had been in the room with him, and Roland said, nobody. They asked him how he had been hurt, and he said, I fell against the bathtub.
Stabbed myself in the lung.
They asked him if he had been trying to commit suicide, and he said no. And then he started mumbling something else and then slipped off into full unconsciousness.
Aww.
They rushed him to the hospital at this time, but he slipped completely into a coma, and he would die shortly after midnight on Saturday, January 5th. So that is all of the events we know that were documented by the witnesses that saw Roland T. Owen when he checked in on Thursday, January 2nd, until he passed away early morning on Saturday, January 5th.
Okay. I keep going, but he might be a bad guy. We don't know anything about him, but it sounds like he was trying to get away from other bad people.
Sounds like it.
That's my guess so far.
So now let's get into the investigation, and there's going to be even more weird shit that's going to happen now.
Okay.
So the investigation started right away, and before he had even passed, they were searching the room, 1046, for clues, and they realized there wasn't a lot to find.
Yeah.
There were no clothes in the room.
Oh, this person took his clothes?
Yeah, so his black overcoat, his shirt, his undershirt, his pants, his shoes and socks, they're all gone. The only thing they found was a label from a necktie.
Was he ever wearing a tie?
I don't know. I think everybody wore a tie back then.
Oh,
I'm not real
okay.
sure. Also missing were all the things that would usually be there supplied by the hotel, such as soap, shampoo, and towels. There was nothing to indicate any kind of weapon that had been used against him.
It was the brother and sister.
Maybe
he had a bunch of cash in his pocket, and she came to please him and was like, ooh, perfect opportunity. He's just this sad dude. I'm going to come back with my brother.
Here are the 4 items they did find in the room. They found a hairpin, a safety pin. Yeah, it was probably hers. An unlit cigarette, and a small unused bottle of sulfuric acid.
Oh, total CIA shit going on.
Totally. There were also 2 water glasses. One remained on the shelf above the sink. These are supplied by the hotel.
Okay.
The other glass lay in the sink and was missing a jagged piece of it.
Oh.
But they didn't find the piece that was missing.
Okay.
When they dusted for fingerprints, they did find 4 very small fingerprints on the telephone stand that they deduced were most likely from a woman.
Oh, this Scarlet woman.
The lady in black.
She just wanted some money. Or she could have been part of this CIA stuff too.
We'll talk about, because there's more stuff that's going to happen. Just you wait. We'll talk about lots of theories.
It's your turn to say, hold your horses.
Hold your horses. I mean, it's hard not to, when you're hearing this, to try and figure it out. Because that's just who we are.
Yeah.
We just try and figure shit out. I do this in movies too. I'm really annoying to watch movies with, because
No,
I will
you're
say
not.
it out loud sometimes.
I watched a couple movies with you.
I'll be like, what's she going to do? Is she going to do that? Is it
Oh,
this?
you're like
Is it
my
that?
daughter. I can't watch anything with her lately. She's like, what's going to happen? Is he going to die? Is this going to happen?
I say it out loud, but I actually don't want you to answer me. It's
I know.
more like me talking to myself, trying to figure it out. Because if I say, oh my God, is he going to die? And then like my kid who's seen the movie goes, yeah, I'll be like, what? Don't tell me. Don't tell me what's going to happen. I'm just talking to myself.
I'll remember that.
So Dr. Flanders was able to deduce that the wounds on his head had happened at least 6 to 7 hours before they found him.
Oh.
Because of the way that the blood had dried.
Okay.
And also the blood on the walls and furniture had solidified in a way that he believed the stabbing and the cutting, anything that caused blood splatters, had happened well before the bellboy showed up for his first trip at 7 a.m.
And
that
he wanted
morning.
you to come in.
Yeah. So he had probably just been laying there after being tortured for a while.
Yeah. His knocking the phone off the receiver was totally his way to notify people. That's all he could do. He
Probably
couldn't
he was
call,
in such
and he
bad
could
shape.
like just throw his hand on it or something to knock it down, because at the time he knew it would show as being off the hook.
So this was quickly carried by all the papers. This was a sensationalized story that some guy was just found dead in the President Hotel, which was like a nice hotel at the time.
Right.
It wasn't, like some seedy place. And so it ran that night in the papers after he passed away. It was the front page.
Was it man in room 1046?
Something like that. I need to look and see if I can find the original papers. But the Journal-Post did quote one of the detectives saying that there is no doubt that someone else is mixed up in this. I think one of the papers ran that possible suicide, and then the other one quoted and said, no, the detective said this is definitely something else going on.
Yeah, someone doesn't do that to themselves.
So then they started interviewing all of the hotel staff. They talked to Jean Owen, who was the next door neighbor in room 1048, and gathered the entire account that I just read.
Okay.
During that night, they began calling to the Los Angeles Police Department, trying to find out who this person is.
Because back then, there weren't IDs.
No.
You didn't have to prove who you were.
There was nothing. I guess, yeah, we always have to think about that. So they called the Los Angeles Police Department and said, we're looking for any records on Roland T. Owen. Before the night was even over, they sent pictures, fingerprints to the FBI. They found out that there was no person who existed named Roland T. Owen from Los Angeles.
How do they really know, though?
I don't know.
Yeah.
By Sunday, it was already being reported in papers that he had registered under the name of Roland T. Owen, but that probably wasn't who he is. It was an alias.
And Don was just one of his multiple personalities.
But we had the man in brown, so don't forget him.
That's true. His name's not Don, though. It's probably something like Frederick. I picture them as like this Italian sibling duo.
Maybe. So word travels fast, and they had a viewing of the body because now they don't know who he is. And so they're asking people for help in identifying who this man could be. They published pictures in the paper, and they invited, I guess, the public to come to the funeral home where his body was. The reports vary anywhere from like 50 to 300 people to 1,000 showed up that Sunday to look at the body.
Yeah, morbid curiosity more than anything else.
We're still back in the time when people like to do this shit. They're like, oh my God, let's go see this guy who was beaten to death. That sounds fun for a Sunday morning.
There wasn't anything else to do.
There's probably like kids there too. They're just like, let's go do it.
Either I go plow the fields or I go look at a dead guy. One is cool. More interesting.
One of the people who stopped by to view the body was Robert Lane, who was the man that picked up the guy on the side of the street.
Oh, okay.
As soon as he viewed the body, he knew it was the same man. And he said that he even noticed the deep scratch on the arm that he had talked about was also on the body. But for whatever reason, the police were just like, you don't know anything. They said he could not have picked up Roland T. Owen in his car that night because nobody in the hotel staff ever said that he left the hotel that night. I can't imagine they're watching every single person.
Knew when he was there ever.
Right.
So
but
everybody was shocked every time. Oh, you're here.
Like they totally threw this out. He was found in a different part of the city running around in an undershirt with blood dripping down the night before he died. And the police were like, that guy's just wanting to make some shit up. I don't know.
They just sucked back then too.
Or maybe he was found inside of the town that was related to the mob, and the police are owned by the mob.
Right.
So
yeah, that's true.
Got some of that too.
Maybe even some of them saw him at a club or something.
Well,
and they know he's related to something, so they can't say anything.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is back in the time when newspapers were very local. So they were looking for this guy in Kansas City, but it wasn't really carried to other parts of the country yet.
Yeah.
But when they realized that they couldn't find out information from the local papers, they did start sending wires to other police departments. And then, like good journalists, they're always listening for those kinds of things. It did start spreading a little bit that there was an unidentified man that was killed in Kansas City. Kansas City Police Department started getting sent letters and telegrams saying that they think it was their brother or their, cousin or whatever. They said it wasn't very helpful. A lot of times people would just write a letter and they're like, no, we need to see a picture. We need to compare. And then people would start sending pictures in and they didn't even match. So it was kind of convoluting the whole investigation.
Gotcha.
The police were able to establish that Roland T. Owen had been seen out in certain liquor places in the company of two women between January 2nd and January 3rd, but nothing more came out of that.
Okay.
So he was out liking the ladies.
Yep. It's what you got to do back then.
At some point after hearing the hotel staff talking about Roland T. Owen and him saying that he had stayed at the Hotel Mulebach, they decided maybe they should go check that out. They found out that no one named Roland T. Owen had registered at the Mulebach.
So the other names start to come to light.
They showed a picture to the hotel staff and they said, oh yeah, a guy that looks just like that came in here and he insisted on staying in an interior room. So similar to what he had asked for at the hotel president. And he had also said he was from Los Angeles, but the name in the register was Eugene K. Scott. So the police called the LAPD again and said, hey, do you have a Eugene K. Scott? And they got the same response that, no, we don't. So both of those were aliases.
Okay.
So then they moved on to trying to figure out who the other person could be that kept coming up, the mysterious man named Don.
Don.
Because we know he left a note to Don and we know he was on the phone with Don.
Mm-hmm. But Don also had aliases, so it's not Don.
Possible. Also remember that when Mary came to return the towels on one of those days, she said there were 2 men in the room.
Yeah.
So at some point, Don, we're assuming is Don, was in the room with him too.
Or multiple personalities, because you can change your voice.
And fight with yourself.
Yes.
I don't think that you can tie yourself up.
Actually, I do know people can tie themselves up. But then to harm yourself after tying yourself up, no.
It would be a very elaborate suicide. The search for Don was very vague because all they had was Don.
Right.
There's probably 100 Dons or more in the area.
Don was common.
Yeah.
Donald.
So we had more people coming forward and trying to identify the body. There was a man named Ernest Johnson of Kansas City who saw the body on that Sunday and he said, that's my cousin. But then when they reached out to the mother of who he thought was his cousin, they found out that he had died 5 years ago. So it definitely wasn't him. But they looked at the picture and they said it was like crazy how much they looked the same.
She thought he died, but really he went into Secret Service or something and he had to leave his life behind.
Maybe.
And have all these aliases and he wanted out, damn it.
He did.
Let him go. Let him be free. He was already scarred.
1 week after the body viewing, Tony Bernardi of Little Rock, Arkansas came forward and said he thought he knew who he was. He was a wrestling promoter. That's what he did for a job. And he identified the body as the same man who had approached him several weeks earlier wanting to sign up for some wrestling matches, which makes sense.
Yeah. It's probably his way of making money.
Yeah. But Bernardi said it was definitely that guy, but his name was Cecil Werner when he tried to register as a wrestler.
It makes sense that this big old burly guy is a Cecil.
Cecil. He said that Cecil Werner had told him that he wrestled for Charles Locke of Omaha. So then the police went to Charles Locke and showed him the picture and said, is this your wrestler that works with you?
They denied
Locke said,
it.
I don't know that guy. So sounds like another alias he was making up, trying to get into wrestling or whatever. He knew that this guy Locke owned a wrestling company, so he just said.
Or Locke is denying it because something fucked up was happening between the two of them.
There's
so many ways to go about this.
I know.
Because it sounds like at this point, everybody's just like, okay, that's your word. All right, let's move on.
This is how they did investigations back then. They kept the body available for viewing. And I don't even know how they did this. Like they didn't bury him for a very long time. Because they were following up on leads and wanted people to be able to come and, I guess, look at the body.
That's what pictures are for.
But finally they gave up, realizing that there were no good leads coming in anymore on Sunday, March 3rd. So this is 2 months after.
He was decomposing.
He had to smell really bad. I don't know. They published an announcement in the Kansas City Journal-Post that Owen/Scott/ whoever he was would be buried the next day in what they called the Potter's Field, which is where they put unknown bodies. Okay. The detective said they still hope someday that they would identify the man, but I guess you can't keep a body out much longer at this point. Yeah. He had to go. So the funeral home that was managing this received an anonymous phone call after that went out in the paper. The caller asked that the body not be buried immediately and promised that he or she would soon send funds to cover the costs of the funeral. 20 days later, on Saturday, March 23rd, the funeral home received a special delivery envelope containing cash wrapped in a newspaper, and it was enough to pay for the funeral and burial. The sender remained unidentified.
Interesting. Just so he can have a proper headstone and stuff?
I guess, but we don't know his name.
They just put them all.
They just didn't want him thrown in a field. So somebody cared about this person, whoever he was. The funeral home immediately called the police, and the police said, well, let's give him a proper burial. He's now been out, 3.5 months? Let's
put him down
before animals start eating him. I don't know what's going to happen to this body soon. They did hold a proper burial in Memorial Park Cemetery in Kansas City, and the only people in attendance were the detectives. They all showed up there hoping somebody
might show up.
Yeah. And nobody did.
Okay. Not the lady in black?
No.
Damn. They missed a good movie scene.
I know. Something else that happened right before the burial is that the Rock Flower Company received another call from an anonymous person saying that they wanted to purchase a bouquet of 13 roses.
Oh.
They wanted it to arrive in time for the burial. They sent the money to cover, which was about $5, which was a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, we know that was worth, $114?
That's what he was so mad about, having to pay a night for a room for.
Right. They sent the flowers and they showed up on the day of the service. It had a card, and the card said, "Love forever, Louise."
Interesting.
The paper ran an article again saying that the man mysteriously killed in room 1046 had been buried, and they improperly said that he had been buried in a potter's field, unmarked grave. And they received a call to the paper that said, you need to correct what you put in the paper. Roland Owen was not buried in the potter's field. Call the undertakers and the florist, and you'll learn that Mr. Owen's funeral expenses were paid and that a floral tribute was placed on his grave.
Yeah, say it right.
So they did correct that and put it in the paper the next day. But I just think it's interesting that whoever is doing this also wanted to make sure everybody in the world knew that
he wasn't just a nobody.
He was somebody.
Yeah.
And whoever was sending this seemed to believe that Ronald Owen was his name. So that's an interesting thought too. I saw it in two different ways. Some said it was a female caller. Some say it was a male caller. This is like part of the story that's
confusing,
kind of confusing, and has been sensationalized because there was one paper that ran it and said that some guy called and said, "This is for my sister."
What?
And cheaters always get what they deserve, which was found to be false later.
Okay.
So I think some of the things that still happen today were happening back then, where journalists and people were just trying to, get
put a
more
story out there.
Yeah, they wanted to have, their paper have more details than the other.
Yeah.
So if you look into this case, you'll see some of that. From what I saw, none of that actually happened. The only thing we know is an anonymous caller, male or female. We don't know which one. And then the Love Forever Louise card.
Right.
2 months later, in May of 1935, the American Weekly magazine carried an account of the murder titled The Mystery of Room Number 1046. In this magazine that had national distribution, there was a photograph of Owen Scott, whatever his last name is, that was taken as he was laying on the coroner's table.
Wow. Okay.
So that got out there to all of the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing happened. They were hoping that might bring someone forward. And so the case went cold. But 1.5 years later, something would happen.
That's my dad. Just kidding.
In the fall of 1936, a woman came across this American Weekly article. Maybe she had an old magazine laying around, takes a while. She noticed the picture looked very much like the son of a friend of hers.
Oh.
And she knew that family had not seen their son since he left Birmingham, Alabama. Her friend's name was Ruby Ogletree. Ogletree.
Way different.
And the police reached out to her, and she had a story to tell. She had a son. His name was Artemis Ogletree.
Holy moly, he has all the cool names.
I know. It sounds like very character in a movie.
Agatha Christie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, can you make this stuff up?
Artemis Ogletree.
Artemis Ogletree.
Wow.
She said he left home with a friend named Joe Simpson in April of 1934. Their plan was to hitchhike across the country. He was 17 years old when he left.
Interesting. Okay. So he'd be on the younger end of all of the age.
Yeah. It would actually make him 19 years old.
Okay.
When he died. And people were saying he was 20 to 35, depending on the people. So,
but if you go through a lot of shit over 2 years, it can change you.
True.
You can look older, especially like hitchhiking and getting involved with bad
God
people.
Knows what. Yeah. Ruby said she knows that Artemis and Joe made it to Los Angeles and that they went their separate ways there.
So he is from Los Angeles. There's one part.
He went there. He wasn't. Yeah,
I mean,
maybe
but he was telling other
people
people that he was from Los Angeles.
Her son had been sending her handwritten letters, just letting her know, hey, Mom, I'm okay. This is where I am.
Yeah.
She knows that he did end up in Kansas City. She described her son as being the adventurous type. Mm-hmm. He wanted to make a career in wrestling. That was his passion. So she confirmed all that.
Totally him then. Artemis.
Ruby had not received anything from her son for a while. He had been sending her handwritten letters, and then all of a sudden they switched tone in a way, and she started getting typed letters, which she thought was odd. They started coming in the spring of 1935, which, as we know, he died in January of 1935. She was confused because her son was not the type that would have had access to a typewriter or even known how to use a typewriter.
Yeah.
I was reading about this, and like back in these days, like a typewriter was kind of like us having a laptop. It was something that like a 17-year-old wouldn't have had the money or access to a typewriter.
Right.
Especially not when he was just trying to be a wrestler. He wasn't like going to college or hanging out with people that would have access to a typewriter. In fact, she was worried about her son because one of those letters at one point said that he had gone to Cairo, Egypt.
Whoa, that's a jump.
Was crazy. And she had actually reached out to the FBI.
Oh.
Because she was worried something was up with her son, and she had no idea where to find him. And I think about this in the 1930s, how helpless you would feel. She also wrote to the U.S. consulate in Cairo to see for any help to find her son. So she was out there looking for her kid and had no idea until her friend brought her this magazine. And she said as soon as she saw the picture, she knew it was Artemis and that her son was dead, which is what she had been fearing for the last year.
Yeah.
She explained that the scar in the scalp above his ear was the result of a childhood accident when he was burned by some hot grease.
Ooh, yikes.
And yeah.
Ouch. Like he's just below his mom or something and she's
probably
cooking.
I don't know. That sounds very painful.
Yeah.
But it also makes sense why
it
the hair wouldn't grow.
Yeah.
She reached out to the Kansas City police and recounted more of the story of what she did know. And she said that Artemis arrived in Kansas City in the middle of August, that she knows. He stayed at the St. Regis Hotel at the corner of Linwood Boulevard and the Paseo, which is still there today.
So he was there for a good while.
Yes.
Yeah.
They were able to research this and find out that Ogletree did stay at these hotels, and they were registered under the name of Don Kelso.
Ah, I told you. Multiple personalities.
So the letters that Ruby received that were handwritten came while Artemis was staying in the St. Regis Hotel.
Oh, okay.
And she talks about the tone in it was very just straightforward. This is what I'm doing, Mom, kind of stuff. And he did mention a man that he was traveling with. And he said, I think that fellow I told you about was going to open a business and give me half interest in it. He's definitely made up his mind to open in the spring. He is about the best friend that I have. He has a big Cadillac, and we are going to Excelsior Springs next week in it. So she knew he was traveling.
Yeah.
And then when the police were able to connect it, that Don Kelso was signing him into the hotels. There was some kind of business arrangement there. Makes you wonder if he was like wrestling for him.
Yeah, there's some kind of associate thing going on, or he's just above him in some way. Do we know how old Don was? It sounds like maybe he was older as well.
No. We'll talk about some of this in the theories. She was receiving these written letters, and then when they switched over to the typewriter letters, she said the tone completely changed. They weren't as straightforward. There were all these like crazy details added in that didn't seem like something her son would say. Said, I got poison on something I ate in some dump. I was laid up for a few days and my stomach pained me a lot, but I finally got over that. Then I got the flu and had to go to bed for almost 9 weeks, and I guess I was pretty sick.
9 weeks?
Yeah. Okay. And she's like, this isn't like how her son would write. And that's when she started thinking something was up.
Probably just to explain the amount of time between the letters. Okay.
I think she started thinking that he had fallen into some gang, is what she said. I don't know if that means the mob or something happened to him. She said he had always been a good boy and he had all these big dreams.
Yeah.
She wrote to even President Franklin Roosevelt at the time, just looking for help for her son. She also got a call on August 12th of 1935. So this would be 8 months after we know he passed away.
Okay.
It was a long distance call from Memphis, Tennessee, and it was from a man saying that he was a good friend of her son. The caller identified himself as Godfrey Jordan and said that he'd met Artemis in Cairo, Egypt.
What?
where, yeah.
Okay.
Where Artemis had saved him from a band of thugs.
Oh.
The conversation lasted 45 minutes and left her feeling very unsettled. And that's at the point when she went to the U.S. consulate in Cairo.
Oh,
finding
she went
out if
there.
wrote a letter to.
Right.
She can't afford to go there, and being like, how the fuck did my son end up in Cairo, Egypt? Is he really there?
Yeah.
But we know that he wasn't.
Okay.
So that's everything that has happened after the investigation. Now, this case is still open, and they have like a Kansas City detective will revisit it every year.
Oh.
So it's kind of one of these like famous
cold case files.
Yeah, something that they all just really want to crack.
Right, sure.
The last thing that ever came in was in 2012.
That's my dad. I'm just kidding.
In 2012, a journalist that has been working on this case received an out-of-state phone call from someone who was asking about the murder in room 1046. The person on the phone said they had been helping itemize the belongings of an elderly person who had just died. They found a box with several newspaper clippings about the murder in room 1046.
Oh.
The caller said that alongside the newspaper clippings, something mentioned in the newspaper stories was also in the box.
Oh. Comb?
I don't know.
The glass piece from the glass?
He said then the caller said, I can't tell you what that was, and hung up and never heard back. So it could have been a prank. I don't know, but that happened.
They had a change of
heart
on the phone. Darn.
Whoever passed away could have been someone that
They didn't
was
say who
there.
passed away?
Girl, boy, we don't know. So that's the only other thing that's out there.
Well, what we do know is this person still has the box. Unless they decided to destroy it.
I don't know. Or it's just somebody fucking around with the journalists and the police. So let's get into some theories because this is everything we know.
Okay.
So number one, many people believe that Don is the person who killed Artemis.
Yes, possible.
There's two ways he could have done this. He could have done it acting alone, or he could have done it in conjunction with the lady in black.
So he could have been the man in brown?
Yes. So there's two different theories. One is that the lady in black and the man in brown have nothing to do with this case whatsoever. Because they did go to the 9th floor. So maybe that was just a man with her for a date. She had been on the 10th floor before, and then she came back into the hotel with the man in brown. They could have just been doing what sex workers and Johns do.
I don't know. She's involved. And there's a hairpin in his room.
I think the lady in black and the man in brown are probably involved.
Yep.
But I'll go through some of these theories and then I'll tell you what I really think. And usually, we go through the theories in the order of what we think are true. So the thought is that the man referred to as Don beat Artemis Ogletree to death in his room.
Okay. I don't see the purpose in tying him up and being all weird about it.
It is weird.
It sounded like he's kind of sexually hogtied, though, the way you described it, which is weird.
That's going to be a theory, too.
Okay.
The theory that he acted alone, I think, is probably the weakest one. I think there's too many other things that happened. The only thing that we have evidence that it could have been Don is there was the note written to him in the room. And then we also know that he was in the room at one point when the maid came by.
Right.
Or somebody was in the room. And then we also have the next door neighbor that heard, but she said men and women fighting.
Exactly.
So I think him acting alone is probably, I can just throw that one out there. Now, where I do get curious is when we bring in the lady in black. Because if you think about it, if Don wanted to kill Artemis, he could have been using the lady in black as like a accomplice, whether she was hired to specifically be that, or he just hired her to do a job and sent her to the room.
Something happened and then they came back.
One of the thoughts is that she was the one that was used to get the key that he then used to lock Artemis into the room because she could have shown up just as a sex worker.
And say, hey, baby, let me tie you up.
Something like that. And then she takes the key and locks him up. And then she goes and meets up with the man in brown.
Yep.
And then she lets him back into the room.
Yep.
Some of this is theorized too because she left 15 minutes before the man in brown did. After she left, he killed. Yeah. But the torturing was done for hours and hours. So my thought is she would have to have been in on it if that's the case.
They left at different times just to have the possibility that someone wouldn't connect them again. That's all.
Yeah. And we know that they left around 4 to 4:30 a.m., both of them. And when you look at the doctor's reports, he was beaten and like stabbed and tortured and all of that about 7 hours before. So that would have been around like midnight timing.
Yeah, which is when they came back.
They showed up, I think it was around 1:30 in the morning according. But this is
not
also
exact science back then.
A witness, yeah, approximating the time. So it would, to me, fit that those two were involved in the torture because they were seen coming and going from the hotel. Nobody else was mentioned.
Yeah, so it had to have been them.
It had to have been them.
They were just hoping at night no one would notice.
She was kind of sent in as a scout first on the 10th floor.
She was the one to get him in a position where the other person could come.
Yeah, because she could have enticed him, like you said, and
tied
him up sexually.
Yeah, let me do this or whatever.
And something that was known about Artemis when they did more research is that he did like to hire women. Mm-hmm. He had been seen with 2 other women out drinking a few days previously. One thought also was that he was traveling with this Don guy, like he had told his mom. They had been in the Hotel Mulebach together, and he tried to escape from Don. Maybe Don went out to lunch or whatever, and that's when he left the hotel to go to the new hotel and sign in under a different name. If Don was, holding him captive in some way.
Okay.
Maybe Don had offered him some kind of business deal and basically was making him a slave in a way and making him go and fight wrestling matches and keeping all the money.
It's true. Yeah. And just somehow involved with whatever mob shit's going on there.
Well, yeah, the wrestling, that's something I'm going to get to here
because
in a minute.
We're talking about gambling and gambling is a part of that. So it was probably all connected in some way.
And a lot of it was fixed, which we'll talk about because organized crime is definitely one of the theories as well. Whatever is happening with him and Don, I do think that they were probably, the lady in black and the man in brown were the ones who carried out the deed.
Yeah.
If they were Don or if they were hired hands. The man in brown could have been a hitman. We don't know.
Yeah.
Don could have been there earlier in the day. They had a fight and Don's like, fuck off.
They're just known as the siblings in town who do stuff.
It could be.
It's very true. Yikes.
If you believe, which I do, what Robert said about picking this guy up in the car. We know at some point Artemis left the hotel and had some kind of scuffle with somebody that took his shirt and then he was running away from them.
Maybe he liked the lady so much he liked the wrong one.
Well, that's going to be another theory.
Oh.
So that's about all I have on the Don acted alone or with the lady in black.
Alrighty.
The second theory I have comes from the flowers and the anonymous person who paid for the burial, Louise. People theorize who could Louise be. So whoever this was cared about Artemis in some way. Didn't know he was Artemis Ogletree, though. She knew him as Roland T. Owens. And perhaps they had some kind of love affair.
Moment.
They had something. And then he burned that bridge. He cheated on her. He did something. And people theorize that she was the sister of like somebody in the mob.
Or she was the lady in black. Maybe the lady in black has a code of conduct. Like she has a code of honor. Like if she kills someone, she does something. She knew him as that name too.
We don't know what she knew him by. We don't even know.
He probably fell sweet with someone in the mob and he was hired to do these wrestling matches and saw her in the corner or something. And
she's the sister of
and it was
Johnny.
Romeo and Juliet situation and they weren't allowed to be together.
This comes from the idea of that, I told you, that sensationalized idea of somebody calling the paper and saying cheater's a cheater and I'm doing this for my sister. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier.
You did. So maybe it was she wasn't allowed to be with him.
They were mad because he wasn't treating their sister right. They offed him, but then because they knew their sister loved him, they paid for a proper funeral for him.
Yeah, she made him.
Yeah. Or, he was known as Roland T. Owen and she found out that wasn't his real name. And then they thought he was up to some shady shit. Something like that went down. So that's another theory is there's something around Louise and the jilted lover aspect.
He got too drunk one night and one of them saw him with a girl hanging on his shoulder.
Could be.
Yeah.
He was out at the wrong bar and brother Johnny saw it and was like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be with Louise.
You promised her.
Yeah, you said you were going to marry her.
You said you loved her. No one messes with my sister.
And that seems like a very movie-ish thing.
Yeah, could be though. And maybe Don just coming and locking him in the room was just damage control because he knew he pissed off the wrong people.
In this theory, Don would be the friend that's like, dude, like we got to keep you safe because you're going to get knocked off because of this. And Don was his business partner, as he said in his letter to his mom. I don't know. It has some legs.
Yeah.
It could be. This is one of those things we
just one leg, 2 legs, 3 legs, 4
legs.
It's
hobbling on one leg. One of the main theories that the detectives focused on was a sexual deviant or a serial killer.
Could be. Could be all of these.
We know there's always active serial killers in the world at any given time, probably right now down the street from us. Who knows?
Yeah.
But they honed in on a man named Joseph Ogden. Ogden had been out doing all kinds of interesting things for many years. He had ended up in prison several times, and he had actually been in insane asylums a couple of times, and he kept changing his name. And I guess you could do that back then. And we know he had been in Birmingham, Alabama at some point, so could have seen Artemis there.
Yeah. Wish I could just change my name every day.
At one point, he escaped prison. It was noted in his files that he had a history of homosexuality, and most of his victims were young men between the ages of like 16 to 19.
Okay.
So seems to fit.
Yeah.
We know one of the murders was of a man named Oliver Senecal. He shot this victim and then dismembered him. He cut off a distinctive tattoo from the body, so he couldn't be identified. He took his body and put it into a big trunk and put it on a steam train bound for Memphis.
Well, that's one way to get rid of someone.
And the cops found it because nobody picked up the trunk. And then they opened it and it's like, oh my God. One of the many aliases that Ogden used was Donald Kelso, which matched the name that they knew had signed into the hotels with Artemis Ogletree. When he told his mom he was traveling with a business associate. So they said, this has to be our guy. And it came out in the paper at that time that they had found the guy. It was definitely him, and that he had killed Ogletree in 1935 and left him naked in a hotel room, much like he had killed this other boy. But the problem was the samples of handwriting. And when they compared the handwriting between Ogden and whoever signed in as Donald Kelso at the hotels with Artemis, they did not match. So they cleared him, but some people still think that that could have been it.
Sounds possible. And maybe he liked Artemis and was keeping him around, but then Artemis did something that just was like, well, I guess I don't need you anymore, so I'm just going to get rid of you.
And it is possible that Artemis is telling his mom that it's a business associate and he was in a relationship with this person too. They were staying in hotel rooms together.
And then he fell in love with Louise.
Now, Artemis's mother has her own theory about what she thinks happened to her son. She suspected that the childhood friend Joe Simpson that her son left the home with is responsible for killing him.
Oh, okay. That they were maybe had a relationship?
I don't know about that, but she said that Joe Simpson acted really oddly after everything came out, and she asked him to meet up with her when he came back to Birmingham, Alabama, but she said he kept standing her up. Like, she just wanted to talk to him about what happened with her son. She also said that she finally tracked him down in December of 1939, and she said that's when she became very certain that he is the one that was somehow involved with her son's death, because she said that he definitely was the one that she talked to on that long distance phone call from Memphis, Tennessee, 7 months after Artemis was killed.
Pretending to be someone else.
Yeah. So she finally found him. She talked to him. She heard his voice and she's like, this is him.
But why would he write her and say that they had split up, or did he come back into his life at some point?
I don't know. There's really no motive behind this. She took it to the cops. They didn't think that it held a lot of weight, but she claims that she looked him in the eyes and told him, I know what that voice sounded like on the phone from Memphis. And she said he turned red, looked down, and got very nervous when she confronted him.
Maybe he's the man in brown.
I don't know. I can't find, from 1935 what he looked like.
And Dawn was already up there at some point. It was 3 people.
We don't know anything about Joe Simpson, and I can tell you that the cops didn't take her seriously.
Yeah.
But she claimed all the way until she died that Joe Simpson was responsible for killing her son.
Or maybe, she was trying to find an answer, and really he was just so distraught and had so much regret for breaking off, leaving him, and then he died. Yeah. And they were supposed to do this together or something, and it's just possible. Eats at him.
So I come down to the final theory, and I think this one, to me, probably holds the most weight.
Okay, we'll see, because we're butchering all of them.
Yeah, I know. This one is around organized crime.
Okay.
Artemis did make it as a boxer wrestler, as he had hoped to. And like we mentioned earlier, back in those days, the mob ran many of the boxing matches, or at least they would pay off fighters to lose or win. So Artemis may have gotten mixed up with them. Perhaps they paid him to either lose or win a match, and he didn't.
Oh.
Don was his boss or his agent that represented him because he was just a 19-year-old kid. He didn't have connections. Don was an older man that got him into these matches. And maybe Don was like, you fucked up. You're supposed to lose. Now they lost all this money. They're going to be coming for you. And Don was actually trying to protect him.
Yeah.
So this is another version of the story.
Right.
Maybe Don promised to help keep him safe, but then we know how things work in the mob. Don got paid off by the mob.
Yeah.
And that would explain why he was out that night and saying he was going to kill him or whatever, that fucking guy, blah, blah, blah. He could have been talking about Don at that point. So he and Don went out. Let's say Don picked him up from the hotel. They went out to do something, but really Don was delivering him to the mob.
And he got away.
And then he got in this car and he was like, I'm going to fucking kill Don, kind of a thing. And he went back to the hotel. And then because they didn't kill him at that point, they send in the lady in black and the man in brown.
Yeah.
To me, that kind of makes sense with how the mob. So they send in their other hitmen because they didn't get the job done.
Right.
And they know he's staying there because Don has turned on him and turned him in.
Right.
So they used those two to come in and torture and kill him. Maybe they were torturing him because he had ran off with money and they wanted to know where the money was. There's many reasons they could have been torturing him.
Yeah.
The reason that I really think this holds weight is because of the sulfuric acid that was found.
Oh, yeah. Forgot about that.
We know that sulfuric acid was something that was commonly used by the mob back in these days to help hide evidence they would burn off fingerprints from their victims.
Yeah.
Or other features that would make them recognizable. For whatever reason, they didn't get to that point.
And they left it behind.
Maybe they ran out of time.
Yeah.
Maybe they got startled by something and they were like, it's good enough. He's going to die. And they just left.
Yeah.
And they forgot their sulfuric acid.
I guess so.
Maybe they were even in the room still when the bellboy showed up at 7 a.m. And I think this makes sense too. Remember, somebody did answer him and told him to come in at one point, turn on the light, but they knew he couldn't come in. Or maybe they would have done something to the bellboy if he came in. I don't know. There's theories that they were still in the room.
But when did they leave? They left at like 4:30. Then it would have to be someone else.
The thought was if they were in the room and the bellboys just kept coming up, they kept getting interrupted. But somebody would have had to see them leave unless they went all the way down the stairwell. Yeah. I think they probably left at 4:30 in the morning and thought he was done for and was just going to bleed out.
Right.
But he survived longer. The other reason that I think organized crime makes sense is because the mob, for whatever you think of them, they were kind of considered an honorable organization in some ways.
Yeah, we've talked about it.
So even if they killed somebody, they wouldn't let him be buried in the potter's field.
Yeah, kind of like how I was saying with the woman in black, that she had this honor code that she still needed to fulfill, even though it might have not been her. But if she's part of the mob, then yeah.
She probably is. I would think that's all connected. And then they would have easily had the money to send and pay for his burial.
Right. Yeah.
They may have really only known him as Roland T. Owen. He probably never, I mean, if you're working with the mob, you're never going to give him your actual name because then your family could be traced back. He's probably trying to protect his mom.
Yeah.
So to me, that seems pretty feasible. And then just the Love Louise and all of that, it's just all for show because it's the mob.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was a mix of both and he did have a girlfriend.
If it was the mob, I don't think that they would actually send Louise as... Yeah. It would be a different name as well.
That could be code. We don't know.
Right.
Or he could have had a girlfriend that was in the mob and knew that he was, hit and she wanted to
Louise
send him flowers.
An acronym for?
I don't know. So it could have been a mix of the second story with the jilted lover and him screwing over the mob in some way in a wrestling match.
Either one. Poor kid, though.
Whatever happened, I think, yes, he went off with big dreams of becoming a wrestler and probably got mixed up in some shady shit.
Yep.
That he didn't mean to. He could have been taken advantage of by this Don guy.
Well, back then, there was a lot of manipulation. There still is. And, he obviously loved wrestling to already have cauliflower ears.
Yeah. Yeah. At 19.
Yeah.
Or they were putting him through it. They were putting him in a lot of matches. He was out, with the ladies at the liquor places. He was living it up.
He just did something wrong.
To me, that makes the most sense because he was acting all paranoid and afraid. He trusted Don, and I think Don turned on him.
Yeah.
And he got knocked off. What do they call it? Is that what they call it? What do they call it in the mob?
I don't know.
I'm trying to think of Goodfellas. What did they call it? I had to look it up. They called it getting whacked.
Yep. Poor kid got whacked. And not in a good way.
Maybe, well, maybe hopefully
both.
he did by Lady in Black.
Maybe they sent her there to give him a gift before whacking him.
The more I just look at all the details and everything, and the fact that Kansas City was such a mob town, it just makes sense to me.
I think it's that. I think it's the mob. I think all the details we could decide on or go with whatever sounds like the best story.
And I also think that's why potentially it was never solved and never will be solved, because you also had a police department that was owned by the mob at the time.
Everything was corrupt.
Yeah, the police chief was in with it. They probably knew exactly who killed him.
Yep.
They're like, oh, well, who knows?
We'll pretend to look into it. It's one of those deathbed confessions again, if ever.
So who was the person, if there was someone who in 2012 found a box? I wonder what that item could have been.
Don's grandchild or something.
Could have been a piece of his clothing.
That or the tie.
Yeah, it was something that would have connected to that person being in the room.
Yep.
And it could have been the hitman. It could have been the woman. Could have been Don.
Could have been Don. Don holding on to it because he feels guilty for getting the kid killed.
Yeah, that actually seems most likely.
Yeah.
Because that was like his kid that he was helping out.
Why would the mob hold on to anything or like a girl? I don't know. It could be, but it makes more sense that it was someone who cared about him.
The more I think about it, I don't think the man in brown is Don.
I know. I don't either. I actually picture him as someone else.
Lady in Black.
Just to help the cleaner upper dude. They had this duo that they would hire for things. And
they showed up and she was easy to get into all the hotels because she
was gorgeous
frequented
and
them.
She gave them what they wanted.
Okay, well, we have solved the murder of 1046.
We have. There's nothing else to talk about.
It's definitely what happened. Try and challenge us. There are a lot of podcasts out there. There are a lot of YouTubes out here on Murder in Room 1046. I'll put some of my sources in there. I thought it was an interesting one to share.
Yeah, it was very interesting. It's fun to do these types of stories. And I love that his name ended up being Artemis and not any of the other names.
Yeah, Artemis is better than Roland T-O-N.
Or what was the other one? It was like
Scott, something K. Scott.
Cecil. Was it Cecil?
Oh, Cecil.
Cecil.
Yeah, Artemis is the best choice. His mom did well with that one. We need to bring back some of these old names.
I've seen Artemis. Yeah. It's not used enough, but yeah, I've seen it.
And you combine it with Ogletree, which is an amazing last name.
Tree.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed a little something different. It is still true crime. It is old timey and it is unsolved. But yeah, let us know your theories.
Yeah, I think we kind of nailed it. But
I covered as many as I could find. I was in all the Reddit forums like usual. It's where we live now. And it's one that still comes up and people love to ponder what could have happened.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this story.
You're welcome.
It was fun.
Yeah.
If you guys know any other stories like this that we can talk about, please send your suggestions to lucidlabpodcast@gmail.com or your lab reports, because that's coming up.
Yes. And I will post some pictures from this case. It is from 1935, so there's not a lot, but I do have some pictures and drawings of Artemis.
Cool.
Those will be on our social media. We're on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Lucid Lab Podcast, one word. And we'll be back next week with, I don't know what you're doing, Jessica.
I'm actually going to be in a similar area.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Kansas again?
In Kansas.
Okay.
So,
but different
I won't
time.
tell you what it is yet.
Okay.
Different time.
Well, we look forward to that. Yes.
Alrighty. Well, take care, everybody. Have a great week.
And in the meantime,
stay lucid.
Bye.
Goodbye.